Okay, IU fans, look, the Hoosiers went out to the Pacific Northwest, thousands and thousands of miles away, and it was mostly good. I think I'm mostly happy with what I saw. Obviously, the Hoosiers clapped Washington by significant margins. A game that was projected to be close. Indiana smashed the Huskies in their building. And then, look, that game against Oregon, we're going to have a lot to talk about. Obviously, IU held a lead with under 2 minutes to go. Oregon came back, heaved in a bomb from Shellstad to take the lead, and then they pulled away from there. This all sets up a gigantic clash with Ohio State on Saturday afternoon at Assembly Hall. Matt and I will discuss the Washington game, the Oregon game, the Ohio State game that is just around the corner, and so much more here on episode 342 of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Thursday, March 6th, 2025. Here, I am your co-host, Nathan Christian. Along with me is Matt Lukens. Matt, it's March. John Rothstein knows his calendar.
Yep.
Indiana went to Seattle, crushed the Huskies, and then that game against Oregon. I mean, we could talk about it in so many different ways. What were your immediate reactions to Indiana's close? I'm gonna call it a nail-biting, tough loss at Oregon by 9 back on Tuesday night because there are a lot of things you could discuss here.
Yeah, I mean the 9 point score line at the end is not indicative
Brutal.
of how close that game was. That was just IU fouling down the stretch and tanking our net rating and Ken Pom numbers. But um that doesn't matter. TBH, what did matter on that day is that I thought IU played as good, if not better than Oregon in that game,
Yeah. Mhm.
but got completely screwed by the referees and Big Ten refs. It was about as egregious a game as I have watched. That was until I watched the Nebraska Ohio State game that happened immediately after. That was also mm, the maybe the
Shocking.
worst officiated game I've ever seen. So that those two games going back to back was a little bit just awful to watch. But no, I thought IU got hosed at Oregon. I will say I've gained a lot of confidence in this team based off of the last two performances, though. One, because even with the refs completely jobbing IU, no one wins in Oregon in March. You ask anybody on the West Coast, they don't lose in March, especially at home in Oregon. They're very hard to beat. Dana Altman always has his team, ramping up into March. That's why they've made Final Fours under his tutelage and his leadership and they've been competitive in NCAA tournaments basically every single year they're in the tournament. So I'm not surprised with IU losing. I think on the schedule at the beginning of the year I put this game as a loss anyways. Just because the West Coast trip, whatever, like second game out there on the West Coast, tough team, tough environment, senior night for them. Like all those excuses, whatever, they played well. Like IU played well. They played one of their better games of the year. They just ended up losing because, well, they were playing 5-on-6, right? And then the Washington performance was very it was an extreme confidence boost for me in the team because they did exactly what I wanted them to do, which was go out and show that they are a significantly better, more talented, better, still somehow better coached, more well put together program and team, which they are. Like that Washington program has not been good for a while now. They have not been ran well for a while now.
Yeah.
And IU showed that golf in class out there for maybe the first time this year, really, that they've gone into a game and really imposed their will from the tip. I thought it was a pretty thorough performance by them. So overall, I my confidence in the team is higher. Now they could obviously tank all of
I
that
know.
confidence that I've built up in them against Ohio State here. But again, IU doesn't lose at home on senior night. I mean, the record kind of speaks for itself. There's only a handful of losses on senior night in the history of the school, especially over the last like 30, 40 years. Even when we've been bad, we still don't lose on senior night. Um, so I'm expecting an IUW out of the Ohio State game. But yeah, I mean, you guys saw I'm sure you're on Twitter. You saw the vitriol directed towards the refs. I mean, that was thoroughly deserved. I had Ant texting me afterwards being like, y'all got gamed, y'all got jobbed. I was like, I know, I've seen that before out of IU. I'm just glad that it's like not just coming from IU
Right.
fans who are
The
kind of like
bias. Yeah.
the bias, right? Because when I'm watching an IU game, I'm like, that's a foul, right? Like, I'm a fan. Like, of course, I'm gonna have that. I'm gonna be thinking that we're getting jobbed at every single turn and every single opportunity. But I was seriously pissed watching this game the other night, and I'm glad that not only the IU fan base was mad, like I was getting texts from my Wisconsin friends and whatever, like, yo,
Yeah.
like what is going on in Eugene? So guys, like it wasn't crazy that we were complaining about the officials. That was the right thing to be doing because they
Yeah.
were terrible at their job on that
Awful.
night.
Yeah, it was just it was totally uneven. And the common rule of sports, yeah, it's not just you, Matt. Like 99.9% of people who complain about officiating are upset because it happened against their team that they root for, or the team that they gambled on, or the team that, they have a rooting interest in. When you get this rare 0.1%, it's actually very, very noticeable. And that's what you saw. You saw a lot of people go outside of people who root for Indiana or gambled on Indiana. Um, he had a lot of people say, "Look, this was just wrong treatment for the Hoosiers in that game." You talked about Ant. He had his audit yesterday of the second half alone when Oregon, again, before all the fouling happened at the end, Oregon had 9 free throw attempts in the second half. Indiana had just two, and
I
that's
use what, two?
before
Yeah.
before all the fouling took place. And you cannot tell me when you watch that game that Indiana was more aggressive or more physical or more in attack mode than Oregon was. Oregon was just as hacky, just as aggressive, just as
And
get it, if not even more. And that's not how it was called.
this the stats tell you that Oregon is one of the teams in the Big Ten that fouls the most. They are one of the teams that fouls at a higher rate than most teams. And for IU to only be awarded 2 free throws the entire time when you're playing through the post for a majority of the game as well is just
It's
impossible.
it's absurd, and it's absolutely absurd. And so, the funny thing is we'll talk about it when we discuss Ohio State. Ohio State fouls a lot too. So
Yeah.
we'll see if the three guys in stripes on Saturday call things a little differently. Of course, IU will be at home. And then there's this other thing. I feel like I saw a lot of commentary about how IU let this game slip away from them, or Indiana like lets another one go um down the
No.
stretch. Like this is not the same as maybe that Maryland game was, if you want to point to one example. um this was a game where Indiana and Oregon were neck and neck and playing intense basketball for 38 minutes, and then Jackson Shellstad hits a bomb. I'm not going to call it a
Yeah.
prayer because he's a good long distance
He
shooter.
also does that.
He
This is part of
kind
his
it's
game.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah, but it was a bomb. I mean, Jackson Shellstad is also a college basketball player. He's not in the NBA. You're going to live with a 35-foot 3-point attempt at the end of the shot clock every day of the
Yeah.
week. This is
That's
not
good
Dame
defense.
Lillard.
Yeah.
It's not Steph Curry. He's just Jackson Shellstad. And he bombed in a 35 footer. I almost did it, but I'm not going to do it. 35 footer um, to take the lead. And then the following possession, there was just a lot of contact beyond the arc by TJ Bamba and Trey Galloway that went uncalled. And then, of course,
Yep.
Indiana has to foul, and Oregon made their free throws, and you tip your cap to a
Yep.
team that is an NCAA tournament team who closed that game out. Now, the officiating was absolutely awful. There's just no question about it. But a couple of the things did cross my mind watching the course of that game. First of all, I still don't get how Indiana can have issues with defensive rebounding with this personnel. You have guys like Renew and Ballo, and Galloway's a good rebounder as out of the guard position, as is Anthony Leal. Lou Goody shows a lot of effort when it comes to the defensive glass and cleaning things up. But once again, Indiana gives up double-digit offensive rebounds. Oregon set a season high with 15 offensive rebounds. They also set a season high in second chance points. This is really frustrating to me because I look at the personnel that Indiana has, just like I sit here and say, this group of players should be getting to the free throw line. They should also be rebounding the basketball after getting stops. And I just
Yeah.
don't get how Indiana can continue to give up numerous offensive rebounds as you get closer and closer to NCAA tournament time. It's something that's plagued Mike Woodson throughout his entire tenure. It happened against Miami in the tournament game that I think we all sort of look back to as a really disappointing conclusion to that season, where Woodson had Trace Jackson Davis and Jalen Hood Schifino. Indiana gave up a crap ton of offensive rebounds to Miami in that game, and did it a bunch last year, and they've done it a bunch this year. Man, I don't know. This offensive rebounding thing, as far as the other team grabbing offensive boards, it's really frustrating because I look at the guys that we have and I say it doesn't make sense, especially now that guys like Anthony Leal are getting more playing time. They should be able to seal those possessions.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but at the same time, like a lot of teams, IU's been forcing teams to take a lot of deep shots, right? And the deeper the shot is, the longer the rebound, right?
A lot of times,
I
yeah.
mean, when you're playing two bigs, right? For which IU was playing a decent amount, at least in the Oregon game. Um, you have two guys down low, so you're outnumbered now on the perimeter when it comes to rebounding. So like it's like counterintuitive almost to have two bigs and think you should just automatically be good at rebounding. But if the rebounds,
Mm.
which a lot of them for Oregon were longer rebounds, when you're boxing somebody out, you're actually kind of at a disadvantage because now you have to reach behind where they're positioning,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, right.
So the longer the rebound, the actually like the harder it is for bigger teams to get. So no, it kind of makes sense that way that IU's been struggling with that. But I mean, it also is like IU's also trying to leak out because they're having a hard time in the half court, especially in the second half of the game. They're having a hard time getting half court offense going, right? So you're
Yeah.
sending guys on rebounding opportunities to leak out, to go and maybe find an opportunity, right? An easy basket, an easy two that you might not find, if in a normal half court situation. And so there was also a couple times where, maybe a Trey Galloway or, a Miles Rice could have been in position for a rebound, but they're kind of already starting to leak out after the shot just in case it's missed and grabbed to kind of get a faster opportunity and a faster look at a basket down the other side of the court. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just unfortunate. Basketball bounces in funny ways, and unfortunately for IU, it bounced not in the way that it wanted to, and then it didn't help. I mean, they played well enough, even with the offensive rebounding from
Yeah,
Oregon.
they were in it.
They played well enough to win that game. And they were screwed out of that game from reasons that were
Yo,
were just
yeah.
out of their control.
By the way, UCLA Northwestern back on Monday night was also an
Was
awful
bad. Was so
officiating
bad.
job. I mean, when I say that, right, I'm talking about an uneven whistle. As long as you're consistent,
Yeah.
I really don't care if you're letting the guys play freely with fewer fouls called, or if you're being really tight and you're saying all this freedom of movement stuff, all this contact is impermissible. Fine, just call it both ways. And as you and I saw during a IU Ohio State primetime game a couple years ago, the refs even adjust at halftime to how they call the
Yeah.
game. If you guys go back, you can watch that. The Ohio State IU game that was on primetime on Fox a couple years ago in the Hood Schifino season. The officials like were mic'd up or they followed them into the locker
Oh,
room at halftime or something, and they like adjust the way they call the game at halftime. Fine, you can do that, but at least call it the same for both teams. And then also, by the way, when you review a play, get the review right. And that did not happen in the UCLA
no,
Northwestern game
no,
a couple of
no, it's
different
not.
times, which was shocking to see. A couple other rapid fire things related to IU, Matt. Malik Renew looks more and more healthy as he keeps going here. There was clearly a drop off when he was injured in January. So for everyone who wanted to run him out of town back in the middle of the season, like you look absolutely foolish. Malik Renew is a double digit scoring machine. He scored in double digits every game since the Michigan game, except for Oregon, when of course we're sitting here and talking about how there was an uneven whistle in many situations where Renew had the ball. Um, I think Renew is a top priority for the next head coach, right? Like you have to do what you can to have him back next season because clearly he's playing better and better now that he's healthy.
This could be a hot take for some people, but I'm gonna whisper it into the microphone.
Oh boy.
He's playing out of position. Um, he's playing as a four, and I think he's more of a small ball five.
Yeah.
And you know who runs great small ball five systems? The guy at Iowa
Iowa
State.
State. Yeah.
Yeah, that guy does really well. I was watching their game. Then they lost their game to BYU, but they had a five man in that Iowa State does. That he has the ball in his hands a lot, makes a lot of decisions with the ball. Sound familiar? Sound a
Mm.
little familiar, a little bit. All I'm saying is that guy fits that guy's or Renew fits that guy's system, if you know what I'm talking about. So
Mm.
that's something to look forward to. But yeah, I mean he's a must keep. He was a double digit scorer. He was what, the second leading scorer on last year's team. Um and then he's gonna probably be what, the second leading scorer on this year's team.
I think so. Yeah.
Um the way things are looking.
Right.
Um and he's gonna be a senior, like fourth year in the program.
Right.
Guy that's been under, uh under the tutelage of a guy that's known for developing bigs pretty well.
Right.
I don't see why you wouldn't want to keep that guy.
Yeah, especially if you can cut down his fouls just a little bit. That's an off-season task. If he can cut down the fouls just a little bit, he becomes even more valuable. Kevin
You know,
Willard, yeah.
I'm about to say at this point, I don't know if I'm gonna ask him to do that, because that's what we
Hey.
asked him to do this summer, and that did not show up in the results. So
Hey, look, look, look,
sometimes
look, look, look.
sometimes you can't teach an old dog new
Oh
tricks,
my God.
Sometimes it's built into his DNA.
Look, all I'm saying is maybe why are we calling this nice young man a an old dog? That's really unnecessary. All right. That is really
He's a dog having a
oh
midlife
my
crisis. All
gosh.
right.
Look, hey, to be fair to Malik, right? He goes from 3.1 fouls per game to 2.6 this year. Now his playing time's been cut down just a little, so the per 40 stuff is about consistent. Like if he can trim it by 10%, 15% next year, I would be a big fan. But even if he doesn't, there's so much production on both sides of the ball. And the last thing I would
Yeah.
want to do is let him go to another team, especially a team like in the conference. And I'm looking exactly at Maryland. I was talking about Kevin Willard there just a second ago. He was saying yesterday how someone like Julian Reese at Maryland has gone through the ups and downs with the Terps, right? He went through a coaching change. He went through a season last year where Maryland missed the NCAA tournament. And he just
Yeah.
keeps sticking with it, keeps sticking with it. And you're seeing Maryland now in the top 20 everywhere. and I think Malik Renew can make something like that happen next year for IU. I would love to see him back in an IU uniform next season, as well as a few other guys. That's something Matt and I can talk about a little bit later. Also, Matt, like Woodson's shortened their rotation quite a bit, and he's leaning more into Leal and Goody and Rice off the
He's listening.
bench.
I think he's listening to our podcast, actually.
I like what I'm seeing. He's giving Kaden Carlisle a little bit of a chance to prove himself. I like that. You always need a little bit of a late season story to happen, and I know Carlisle does a thing or two that makes you want to, pull your hair out. But I can also see a
I'm
game
losing
in the
hair
Big
because of him. Like
Ten tournament.
he owes me a plane ticket to Turkey. That's all I'm saying.
I think there might be a game here. It might be Saturday. It might be in the Big Ten tournament where it happened against Oregon, frankly, where Carlisle hits a couple shots in the first half to make sure the deficit doesn't get bigger, or in a late game situation, maybe Indiana does have foul trouble. Carlisle, you need to trust someone to come in and hit a couple of quick shots for you at some point in these tournament type games. And it's not like you're asking Kaden Carlisle to play the role he played at the start of the season, where you're
No.
expecting him to really be a critical factor. You're saying, hey, look, man, you're coming off the bench. We know what Miles Rice can give us off the bench, but Miles Rice isn't going to be like a automatic sort of instant offense shot maker, which is what Kaden Carlisle can do. I like what Woodson's doing. I said this last time we had a podcast episode after the Purdue game. Like Woodson's pushing a lot more, pushing the right buttons a lot more right now over the last 5, 6 games than he has at any point this season. And in fact, I was even thinking
Yeah.
about this during the Oregon game. Like IU almost outsmarted Oregon on their way to victory. Indiana, I just out prepared and out focused Washington on the way to a 20 point. Well, it was what was the actual final? It was a 16-point win. So that's what I like to see. And guess what? Against Ohio State, the coaching matchup is going to be tough. In the Big Ten tournament, especially if it's against Altman, it's going to be tough again because Indiana, Oregon look like they're headed for an 8-9. Overall, Matt, I think Woodson's
Yeah.
pushing a lot of the right buttons. Um, I like what I'm seeing here. Is that crazy?
No, no, that's not crazy. I think that circles back to kind of what I opened up the podcast with. Like, my confidence in this team is growing. Is that a bad
Me
thing?
too. Me too.
I don't know. But every time I watch this team, I go, I love what I'm seeing from Leo. Good, he's looking more comfortable by the day. Miles Rice looks way more comfortable in his role off the bench.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, okay, people are like, oh, it's Miles Rice time when he takes a late game shot, but he's at least he's
Hey,
not
hey, hey.
afraid to take the shot. Like that's the thing is that it's about a game. It's about basketball's a game of averages, right? Like he's
Yeah.
bound to make one of these, right? That you guys are calling Miles Rice moments, but like I can get why it's frustrating to watch, but like the guy's got to take the shot and somebody has to, and he's our pretty much our best perimeter creator.
Yeah.
So, so like he is the guy for the job to do that, and the team is asking him to do that, and he's taking those shots, which he's supposed to be taking. So like it's just the results not there, right? The result sucks, which you know the results for IU basketball have sucked for a long time. All right, so at least they're trying, right? So um but yeah, where was I going with this? I've just been
Well, they're
rambling. What
playing
was the
better. They're playing better. They're
They're
playing
playing
better.
better. They're playing better. Yeah.
And with Woodson too, like I'm not expecting you to win the national championship, but keep
Oh God, no.
this like improvement going as long as you can. That's what I was concerned with as IU went out to the Pacific Northwest. I was sitting here and going, hey, like you beat Purdue at home, you beat Penn State at home. Is there going to be a letdown? It would have been totally understandable.
Yeah.
And it would have been so typical of this IU team under Woodson, especially to go out to Washington and lose by double digits or go to Oregon and lose by 15 or 20. And they didn't. They played 78 minutes of really good basketball. And
Mm,
this is what it takes. Like as you get to these tournament type games, you want to make sure you're playing as well as you can going into the Big Ten tournament or the NCAA tournament. And
right.
so, it's really encouraging to see that take place. We got a lot more to talk about here as far as IU men's basketball is concerned. A lot going on around the program. Huge game against Ohio State coming up on Saturday. But first, it's time for Who Won the Week this past week in IU sports. And how about we tip our cap to the Indiana men's swimming and diving program, who won their fourth straight Big Ten championship over the weekend in Minneapolis. The Hoosiers, number two ranked in the country, won the event by 431 points, which was the largest in Big Ten history. 11 individual championships won by the Hoosiers over the course of that Big Ten swimming and diving championship. And then I saw that on the women's side, Alex Shackle, who was an Olympic
Mm-hmm.
gold medalist in Paris, a
Mm-hmm.
Carmel High School swimming superstar,
Mm-hmm.
committed to the IU swimming and diving program to under the tutelage of Ray Luz, of course. Um, it's really incredible because Shackle, I believe I saw, was one of a handful of swimmers in Indiana swimming and diving history to win the state title in a specific event in all 4 years she was in high school, which is
Mm.
crazy. I think she's one of 14 or 15 swimmers in the state of Indiana to ever do that. And then she went to Paris over the course of last summer. As part of the was a gold medalist on the
Yeah, member
freestyle
of the
relay
Olympic team.
team.
Yeah.
And then
Mm.
she, I believe, had originally committed to Cal, the swimming and diving program out there on the West Coast. And then some,
Yeah,
it
but
fell through.
no one wants to go swimming in the ACC.
It fell
So,
through, and Indiana's going to get a superstar on their hands here as far as the women's swimming and diving program is concerned, which is
yeah, that
wonderful
that
to see. And yeah,
huge pickup.
the ACC, God, in every sport is just so
It's
off right
so
now.
bad.
So
Uh,
disgusting.
did you see, speaking of swim and dive, did you see there was an event, and it might have been on the men's side, where they placed one, two, three, four, five? Like they were so dominant in this victory that there was an
Oh,
event where literally the only other, you know, team that placed like decently was in sixth place.
I did. I did see that. I did see that.
Like
I,
what?
I can't imagine there are too many other Big Ten championships in track and field or in other sports where one university finishes 1 through 5 in any particular event. Like, are you crazy? That's absolutely absurd. I did see that, and this program's a juggernaut, man. I mean, if you guys haven't gone to a swimming and diving event at IU, like I would highly recommend doing so. It's definitely a fun experience for sure. Quick reminder, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. You can find us on social media at Indiana HQ or at the Hoosier Sound. Matt, let's talk a little bit about the bubble before we dive into Ohio State. Of course, this Indiana team squarely in the discussion for the NCAA tournament. They are in the field right now, according to Bracket Matrix. They are in 114 out of 118 brackets listed on
Mm.
bracketmatrix.com as of March 5th. So there are 4 out of 118 that don't have Indiana in the field. Indiana's an 11 seed. And look, IU has accumulated 4 quad 1 wins. They've avoided a loss in quadrants 2, 3, or 4. That stands out significantly compared to the other bubble teams that Indiana is competing with. Um, Ohio State is one of them, and Ohio State went to double overtime against Nebraska back on Tuesday night. That loss really hurt Nebraska's case. In addition to Nebraska losing to
Yeah.
the Gophers in Lincoln over the weekend, um, as you look at this bubble, Matt, like what are your reactions to what you're seeing as far as this bubble is concerned? Because Indiana's competing with teams like Arkansas, Ohio State, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Boise State, Xavier, North Carolina, Texas. It's just, this whole season we've compared ourselves to the top of the class in the Big Ten, and then when you see Indiana against these other bubble teams, the Hoosiers don't look too terrible.
The bubble's extraordinarily, actually unprecedentedly bad this year. The bubble is awful. And it's small too. There's only a couple teams. Now, I'm really worried about bid stealers. We talked about this in
Mm,
last podcast,
hmm
but there's a couple bid stealers out there that I'm afraid of. But if everything goes well in those small conference tournaments, I mean, IU needs to obviously win on what, Saturday, Sunday? When do they
Saturday.
play?
Saturday
Saturday.
afternoon in the US.
Sunday morning for me. But anyways, they need to win Saturday for most people that are watching this podcast. They need to win on Saturday. And then I think they probably need to win that first game of the Big Ten tournament.
I agree.
Maybe they might not even need to win that if they just beat Ohio State on Saturday. Um, but they probably need to win two more games, and then I'd start to feel comfortable. But the problem is we might end up playing Oregon again,
Yeah, we might, or
which
Illinois.
I don't want to play Illinois. Illinois is going to kill us. Though we did catch Illinois at a bad time.
We
Like
did.
when
And
we
we
when
caught
we
it at a
played
bad time
Illinois.
for us too.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be interesting to see how that game unfolds. Illinois has not been not been doing too hot as of recent. I don't if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure
Yeah, no, absolutely.
it's just been really hit or miss with them. And they're one of the worst shooting teams, if not the worst shooting team on volume in the country. I think that's the statistic. Like they shoot so many threes and they're so terrible at shooting threes. It doesn't make sense, but
Except at Assembly.
um except at Assembly Hall where they become Thanos. I don't understand. But hopefully Ohio State doesn't do that on Saturday. So but yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
think two
yeah.
wins and they're in. Two wins
Yeah,
and they're for sure and they're not in the first four. Like
right.
I think one win and they lose in the first round of the Big Ten tournament, which always happens. Then we'll be playing in Dayton. But I think they're in the tournament with a win on Saturday, irregardless.
I'll be honest with you too, though. I'll be honest with you though, Matt. Like, even if Indiana loses twice, which is to Ohio State at home and to, let's say, a quad one team on well, it won't be a quad one team on Wednesday if Indiana plays Wednesday. Because losing to Ohio State means Indiana would play on Wednesday. So look, if you lose to Nebraska, USC, Iowa on Wednesday, the Big Ten tournament, that wouldn't be great. But like, I don't think Indiana is going to be eliminated from the bubble discussion, even with two losses, which is crazy to say because even with two
I
losses, Indiana's at
I
18 and
I,
14 and 9 and
I
12 in Big Ten play. Like, I don't think they would be eliminated from conversation.
oh they'd be in the first four out, I think,
Yeah,
with that.
probably.
Which means obviously they're still in the conversation, but I think there will be bid stealers. So if you're in the first
Uh,
four out and you're looking for an invite to the dance,
right.
I don't think you're not even yeah, you're not getting any help from anywhere.
Yeah, and you're talking about, look at teams like Drake in the Missouri Valley, right? If Drake
Drake in the
loses,
Missouri Valley, what if
you got
McNeese loses, right?
McNeese in the Southland, yep. Yale.
Who else?
I think Yale probably has to auto qualify. UC San Diego is probably making the tournament out of the Big West, even if they lose
Yeah,
in the conference
yeah.
tournament. UC San Diego has a top 40, I think top 40 Ken Pop net. Um, I think they're top 40 in both. Um,
What if somebody in the West Coast Conference outside of Gonzaga or St. Mary's wins it? Right?
Yeah,
because
very much.
Gonzaga St. Mary's for sure making it. And what if somebody outside of the ordinary in the Big Ten wins it? Like for God's sake, what if Rutgers goes on a run, right? Or what
Mhm.
if somebody in the ACC goes on a run and steals a bid, right? Like so, it's not even just the minor conferences, the major conferences. We've seen an NC State team that probably shouldn't have been in the tournament make a run and then get in and then make a run in March, right? So. Like it's not been that long since we've seen some of these teams who were, on the outside looking in, turn it up in a conference tournament in March, go from,
Oh yeah.
first four out or next four out into the tournament, into a play-in, into a Final Four appearance. Like this is not out of the question in this sport.
Yeah, someone in the American Conference outside of Memphis. That's another
Yeah.
candidate there. And
There's
so
so many conferences like the ACC is terrible. Uh I'm trying to think. The American is awful. The West Coast Conference this year outside of Gonzaga and St. Mary's has been atrocious. But I wouldn't put it past any of those teams for losing their conference tournament and giving an extra bid to that conference, right? Like,
I
what if
yeah.
Duke slips up in the tournament and they're kind of sparingly using flag and their shots aren't falling on one night, they get upset. All of a sudden, the ACC is wide the heck open, and you can get a bid stealer there. So, yeah, we got to watch as IU fans. This is not a comfortable position to be in because you got to watch every single tournament because you could go from last four in to first four out very quickly by no fault of your own.
Very true. Um, a life will be a lot easier, especially if you beat Ohio State, because not only do you beat the Buckeyes, who are a fellow bubble team, but that also clinches a top nine finish in Big Ten play for IU. That means you're playing on Thursday of the Big Ten tournament. Obviously, playing on Wednesday gives you a more free win to add to your win-loss ledger. But from an
Mm,
optic standpoint, you finish 10-10 in Big Ten play, top nine in the league. You don't play until Thursday of the Big Ten tournament. And then your two other bubble peers, Ohio State and Nebraska, play on Wednesday. And all of a sudden, it's hard to really create an argument for Ohio State or Nebraska over Indiana. Plus, you're at Assembly Hall, you're at home, you're facing a team you've beaten before this season. So, taking care of business against Ohio State will go a long way. There is also some discussion out there about not knowing how much the committee
yeah.
takes conference tournament results into consideration. Um, there have been examples in the past where the committee really doesn't put too much influence in conference tournament play. Of course,
Yeah.
the big difference is if you go through and you win it, or maybe you unexpectedly make the final, do something really out of the ordinary. But Indiana and Ohio State both might want to do work here on Saturday. And of course, it helps the Hoosiers significantly that they beat Ohio State in Columbus and they have the Buckeyes now in Bloomington coming up on Saturday. The final thing I'll say here is if you take Indiana out of the picture for another bubble team, like forget the bid Steelers for a sec, but if you take Indiana out for another bubble team, I would really like to know who that bubble team is because right
Mm,
now, when you look at the teams that are out of the field that need to work their way back in, according to Bracket Matrix, teams like Boise State or Xavier or North Carolina or Texas, their resumes are really, really, really bad. I mean, and I understand Texas was a little bit of a victim of the SEC this year. The SEC is a very, very tough league. But at the same time, like my friends in Texas don't lose to Georgia at home by 16
no,
and
no.
don't don't go to South Carolina and lose by 15. Of course, a mutual opponent between Texas and Indiana, the Gamecocks, the Hoosiers beat South Carolina like everyone else did. Texas lost to South Carolina by 15 just a couple of weeks ago. So this bubble, if North Carolina loses to Duke this weekend, I'm really not sure how North Carolina can have any kind of argument except for a brand bias thing. Um,
Mm.
if you're going to replace Indiana with another bubble team, I don't know who it is. And by the way, I don't really care if Indiana plays in Dayton. and I know most people will probably disagree with this, but look, if you don't have to play in the first four, fine. Like, I'm not gonna be upset with that. But Dayton is not a competitive disadvantage, especially as you go into the round of 64. Plenty of teams have gone to Dayton, played well, won, and you keep the vibes going into Thursday and Friday of the round of 64. When Indiana played in Dayton, it went badly against St. Mary's because Indiana played like crap against St. Mary's. It wasn't because there were, it wasn't because they played in Dayton. They had some traveling to do, but Indiana
Right.
also played 3 games in the Big Ten tournament the previous weekend, and then they went from Dayton to Portland. Um, and all I'm saying is like, I don't care if Indiana plays in Dayton or doesn't play in Dayton. I just want Indiana to hear their name called on Selection Sunday. So
Mm.
we'll see what happens there. If you want to talk about that, Matt, you can after this, or we can dive into Ohio State. But first, it's time for a social media shout out where I have to remind all of you once again, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. That kind of support really helps us grow this podcast. If you want to find us, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube at Indiana HQ or at the Hoosier Sound. Man, on Instagram, we're not Indiana HQ, but what are we?
Indiana.HQ.
You can find us there. Lots of engagement, lots of chatter, a lot of comments going on all across social media. So make sure you join if you have not already. Um, yeah, I mean, that's how I see this bubble thing play out. Of course, Matt, a fellow bubble team here at the Ohio State Buckeyes, they're going to be coming to Bloomington on Saturday, 3:45 Eastern, tip off against the Buckeyes. I actually do have to give a shout out to CBS. Unlike other networks that broadcast the SEC, for example, um, CBS says, hey, look, we'll give a 15-minute buffer at the end of our first game so that we don't have to join the second game, the succeeding game, 10 minutes into the first half.
Right.
So on Saturday, there's a game before Indiana, Ohio State on CBS. Iowa State plays Kansas State on CBS. That's a 1:30 start. So instead of jamming it right up against that one, CBS says, hey, Ohio State, Indiana, we'll get started at 3:45. Give all of you enough time to tip things off. So shout out to CBS. Great business decision there. Um,
Mm.
the Hoosiers, Matt, are going to be favored against the Buckeyes. I think it's going to be by a point or two. Um, Indiana went to Ohio State and won back in January. It was kind of a game that I think a lot of Hoosier fans kind of blocked out of their memories because IU had lost to Illinois, they had lost to Iowa, and then they played this really just Friday night January road game in Columbus that the metrics sit back and say, wow, great job, Hoosiers. Way to go to Columbus and win a big time game that looked great in the
Yeah.
metrics. Matt, what are your initial thoughts here? Ohio State at Indiana, Assembly Hall, senior night, Mike Woodson's final game as head coach of Indiana in Bloomington. What are your thoughts here? Ohio State versus Indiana. Everyone's going to be watching.
Everyone's going to be watching. It's a huge, obviously, you've just talked about it. It's a huge game for the bubble. It's a huge game for both teams to kind of get on the right side of the bubble going into the Big Ten tournament. I like the Hoosiers in this matchup. I know I alluded it to at the top of the top of the show, but like, like IU doesn't lose on senior night. All right. Historically, this is not a thing. We do not do that. We will not be losing on senior night, and I refuse to believe that would change at any point in time, even with the current state of the program. Um, so um, I have faith in these guys, and I think IU's playing some of its better basketball, and they beat Ohio State when IU was playing like a subpar program. So I like IU in this matchup. How about you, Nathan?
Me too. I will say Indiana did lose to Rutgers in Woodson's first season, senior night. That required a
That's true. Yeah.
a I was gonna say a Dylan Harper senior. That's a joke, but a Ron Harper
That
Jr.
that
A Ron
Ron
Harper
Harper
Jr.
Jr. and your stupid buzzer beater. I was there for that game. That sucked.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that one. That one kind of stings now that I
Yeah,
talk
that
about
one
it.
hurt. That
Wow,
one really hurt.
man. And that was a similar circumstance too. Remember, Rutgers and Indiana were both on the bubble that year too. Now Indiana got in, even though they lost against Rutgers. That's encouraging to see. Of course, IU played Wyoming that year in Dayton before St. Mary's, but um,
We're projected to play St. Mary's again, by the way. Fun fact.
you know,
I mean, it's not really a fun fact. I don't know why I said it like it was a fun fact. That's not a fun fact. I don't like playing St. Mary's. Can we not play St. Mary's, please? Thank you.
yeah, I'm gonna say one thing. Like Randy Bennett can coach. He can
Yeah,
coach
you
the
can.
best of them. And remember, Indiana's 0-1 against the West Coast Conference this year. Um, and the team that Indiana
True.
lost to
It's not
got
as good as
wrecked.
St. Mary's.
Got wrecked by St. Mary's in the West Coast Conference race. Like a 3 game margin at the top of the West Coast Conference this year. Um, and
Unheard of,
so
actually.
that's like kind of wild. I mean, Mark Few can coach as well, and St. Mary's really ran away with it. Um, I like
Mark Few can
Indiana
also drive drunk. But anyways, continue. Yes.
Randy Bennett does not.
Anyways, so I
Uh,
had to do that.
Randy Bennett does not. Um, I like Indiana too, just because I'm I'm sitting here and thinking about how Ohio State went 2 overtimes back on Tuesday night, and
Mm-hmm.
like they won the game. Right? I would be more nervous about Ohio State had they lost to Nebraska and Columbus
Right.
because then they are really playing this desperate balls to the wall, relentless, crazy type of basketball where they are really thinking about this game on Saturday as if their season is really, really, really on the line. If Ohio State loses a quad one road game to Indiana, it's not great for their resume, but like they'll sit here and say, hey, look, we can make it up Wednesday or whatever in the Big Ten tournament. But by winning that game, I'm sorry, and so by winning that game against Nebraska on Tuesday night, I think they might have a little bit less desperation as they come to Assembly Hall on Saturday. But the one thing
True.
I will say is like as much as we like having this game at Assembly Hall, as much as we like this game, being senior night, senior day, and of course you'd rather be at home than on the road. There is this added element where if Ohio State goes out there and takes a lead and sort of Indiana has a couple of defensive breakdowns and maybe they make a coaching mistake at some point, substitutions or something. The pressure in Assembly Hall could really make things uncomfortable on Saturday. So hopefully what we get is 40 minutes of fun, exciting basketball where IU really plays with a positive spirit, a positive mindset. They hit some shots. That first half against Oregon, the threes wouldn't fall. And looking back, that would have made a pretty significant difference in the game if they had just hit one or two more in the first half there. Um, because in the second half, the Hoosiers went 6 of 15 beyond the arc against the Ducks. But you can just
Right.
get that first, you get hit some threes early, get the crowd really into it, throw some dunks down in the fast break. Um, because if it does get negative, that pressure in Assembly Hall could get really uncomfortable Saturday afternoon. But with that said, like Ohio State statistically does a couple of things that I think should really, really help IU. And we talked about it a minute ago. One of the things the Buckeyes do quite a bit is foul. They put their opponent on the line quite a bit. And Mike Woodson ripped the officiating after the game against Oregon. And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, hey, look, Ohio State, a team that's given up at least 17 free throw attempts in every game since 2025 began, Indiana should really be able to get to the line 25, 30 times against the Buckeyes here, even if the game
Mm.
doesn't go into OT. If not 20, let's go 20, 25 against the Buckeyes here because, like, Renew and Ballo and the way Rice and Galloway penetrate into the paint,
Mm.
Mbako, like I use players should be getting to the free throw line fairly consistently in this one. And of course, look, you got to make them once you get there. Um, but if the Hoosiers can get to the line, if nothing else, that might put the Buckeyes into a little bit of foul trouble. And then the other thing too is Ohio State does turn the ball over a good amount. And normally I wouldn't pay too much attention to that, but it's funny, like a lot of their turnovers are just kind of foolish mistakes, like those things like illegal screens and stuff like that. And what I'm hoping to see on Saturday afternoons that the Buckeyes do commit some turnovers. That in turn fires up the crowd. That in turn gives Indiana maybe a couple of easier baskets. The
Mm.
Buckeyes only had 9 turnovers against Nebraska, but you definitely hope Indiana can sort of turn up the heat, turn up the intensity against Ohio State here, force them to make some mistakes. Because I will say, in the event of a close game, the Buckeyes are a very, very, very good free throw shooting team. And so I hope that Indiana doesn't get into like a free throw, like, Indiana doesn't have to foul Ohio State late, like they did have to foul Oregon late, because then at that point, the Buckeyes could potentially pull away a little bit. Ken Pom, Matt, has this game 76-75 in favor of Indiana, excuse me, 75-74 in favor of Indiana. I don't
Mm.
see that many points in this game. I really don't.
No.
I feel like it goes under. I have Indiana winning this game. I think the Hoosiers will take this one something like 71-67. Good game, just like the Oregon game. Both teams playing well, but I think Indiana will have just enough there to get the job done. Is that how you see this game going, Matt? Who do you have winning and by how much?
You're stealing my thunder here because I think that's almost exactly how the game goes. I just think the Hoosiers will find a way to win on the free throw line. I don't know if it's going to be in the last seconds because they're getting fouled or just throughout the game because they're going to be getting fouled through the game, but they'll win this game at the line, which means I think Mbako is going to have a big game because he's one of our better free throw shooters. I think Miles Rice will get to the line a bit, and I'm hoping for one of the best games from uh uh Omar Ballo
Mm.
when it comes to his free throw shooting because he should be getting to the line a bit as well. So yeah, I got the Hoosiers winning about 70-64. I don't think it's gonna be
Ooh.
that close in the end. I think they'll win comfortably through free throw margin.
Yeah, and as you were talking about with Rice and Mbako, the other guy would really like to rely on to make some free throws and just have a good game overall is Luke Goody, who of course led all
Yeah,
scorers with 23 against Ohio State back when the Hoosiers
the
played
last time.
the
Yeah.
Buckeyes in Columbus. So yeah, and of course in that game Indiana did not have Malik Renew, and Indiana is going through a psychological crisis. So now Indiana has Malik Renew, and I wouldn't say we're in crisis mode anymore. So, you'll take those two
Mm.
things. You'll take those two things as as advantages here. Uh um and so yeah, Luke Goody. I love your call there. Miles Rice, Mackenzie Mbako. Hopefully Mbako can hit a couple shots early, feel good about himself, and be an X factor for IU against Ohio State on Saturday. Any final thoughts here as we wind down on this Thursday, Matt? Big Ten basketball this season has been a wild ride. Tournament play
Hmm.
kicking off today for the women's team against Oregon, and then the men's team next week, hopefully on Thursday. What are your final thoughts here as we wind down on March 6th?
Yeah, I mean, March is here. I got my office in China doing a March Madness bracket that I'm putting up of my own money to run, which should be fun. I have a bunch of native Chinese people betting on, not betting, sorry, because there's no betting in China.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
uh,
disgusting and having fun talking about
uh, handshaking and having a fun, giggly time about March Madness in the office, which should be fun. And it would be way more fun if I could just purposefully int and ruin my bracket by not ruin my bracket, but faithfully predict IU to win a national championship in my my
Yeah,
office's bracket
yeah,
pool. So
yeah.
hopefully they make it there so that I can have that opportunity to do that little meme slash what will happen. So yeah. What about you, Nathan?
Slash what will happen. Yes, correct. We are all NC State at this point. Everyone is NC State. We can all
Look,
do it.
look, I'm down, but I mean that does that mean Woodson comes back next year? Whatever. That's a question I don't want to answer.
I mean, the answer is no. He's not coming back next year.
No,
Indiana
he's
could
not.
win a
He's
national
not.
championship and he's gone.
We talked
Um,
about this on Ant's stream. We talked about
yeah,
this on Ant's space. It's not happening. So you guys know about that.
he might have the larger say in who Indiana hires this offseason. We might give him a we might give him an opportunity to throw in a good word for someone, but no, he's not coming back.
Yazir Roseman, welcome to IU.
Um, yeah. No, overall, I like what I'm seeing here. As far as IU playing better, I think you hit the nail on the head in the first, 5 minutes. Like when I watch, I'm not dreading watching this team right now. I'm looking forward
No.
to every single time IU plays. And I honestly think they're capable of beating anyone on any given day, particularly because this entire conference is, I think, well, I think the elite team is Michigan State and Indiana won in East Lansing. So I think Indiana is one of the few teams really in the Big Ten that can say, oh, we feel good about playing Michigan State, or we feel good about playing Maryland, or we feel good about playing whoever, because Indiana's competing against those teams. And over the last few games, like one thing that has really stood out, especially since the Purdue win, is that IU's doing a good job of preventing things get away from them. It's funny because like there are so many different games of basketball played within 40 minutes. And, sometimes you'll be on the front foot, you'll be playing better, you'll be taking and making threes, and you'll be getting out in fast break. And then there'll be other times when the other team is doing that to you. And in those situations,
Yeah.
like you can't let it get out to 10 or 12 or 14 or 16-point deficit. Indiana's done a good job against Penn State and against Oregon of making sure that they're within arm's reach. They're within arm's reach. They're within arm's reach. And that allows them to potentially go on a run and take the lead in the second half. And that's exactly the recipe for success that they had against Penn State. And that's exactly how they played the first 38 minutes against Oregon before Shellstat hit that bomb from 35 feet. So that to me shows concrete improvement. It shows progress. I mean, if Indiana plays Oregon, I can't wait. If that's what it takes Thursday in the Big Ten tournament, I'm pumped. Like I would love to see that matchup in Indianapolis. If Indiana plays Illinois, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to see what the Hoosiers have in store. I believe though, I have to double check, but I believe Indiana can only play Illinois or Oregon. No, that's not right. I take that back. Just ignore everything I said there in the last 5 seconds. But at the end of the day, it is very possible that Indiana plays Oregon on Thursday. I would be ready to see that matchup. Of course, what that would mean is if Indiana wins, they probably face Michigan State on Friday, which I'm sure Tom Izzo and his team are licking their chops at that opportunity. But I like the way Indiana's playing, and I will say, like, if bid Steelers take Indiana's spot in March Madness, so be it.
Hmm.
But if there's a bubble team that's gonna jump in there for the Hoosiers, I'm gonna be really, really surprised. I mean, I understand it could take a North Carolina win over Duke or a Texas run in the SEC tournament, but wow, I mean, their resumes right now are really, really awful. Indiana's done some good work, like winning in Columbus, winning against Penn State on the road, beating Purdue by 15. All things that you love to see there. But folks, that about wraps it up for our 342nd show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your support. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you heard today, be sure to follow us at Indiana HQ to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to our website, indianahq.com, to find it all in one place. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we will see you next time.
Peace and love. Go Hoosiers.